it all boils down to this. All value is subjective to your experience, and your experience is unique to you. And, this could be intertwined with questions of, should I own Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency? Should I, talk to my family about my finances? What should I do with my career? Like, these are all very, very specific situations unique to you, and they're going to change your overall value profile.
Let's dive into it. So, welcome to the Money Alchemist podcast. I'm your host, Brent Gargano,
and I'm Ben Jones.
And Ben, we were talking this morning a little bit about it's a holiday season, and it just seems like there's a lot of finance talk, out there. So you had some experience this weekend with people asking you money questions. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's as a money guy, I think it's so awkward, right? Because nobody actually wants you to talk to them about their money because they don't want you to like sell them something, but they all want to pick your brain. It's like, the trap as a money guy is you're sitting there at the table and somebody asks you like a deep financial question. Like I just have a quick question for you. Like, should I be contributing to a Roth? And you're like, oh, like there's a little bit more to this than that. And I don't know if you're ready to really go down this conversation that you've just opened you've just kind of opened the rabbit hole. And of course, my brain, which doesn't know how to let things go, like wants to answer the question. So then I start asking a couple questions and it gets awkward quickly, And I think this is one of the challenging things about being like a finance person is that there are people in your life, around the Thanksgiving table that are genuinely curious about like your thoughts on things, but they also don't want to tell you everything about their financial situation. Or they don't quite know what they're asking you when they ask you.
Yeah. Well, they default to the common questions that everybody asks, like, should I buy Bitcoin, or, what do you think of MicroStrategy, or what do you think of this or that? It always devolves into some form of like performance experiment. Tell me the future. What is it going to outperform over the next couple of years? And it's like, we don't know. So, I mean, we've got a hunch just like everybody else has a hunch. So, but it ultimately kind of devolves into some simplified question. Or it'll be more macroeconomic. I get a lot of macroeconomic questions because it's fun to talk about. It's also in the news a lot, especially with this being election season. There's a lot of talk about tariffs and, international stocks. What's a strong dollar? What does that mean? Because you're hearing all this stuff, and it's bleeding out into pop culture. So it's being talked about, at the political level. Then it's being picked up by the news networks, and it's being picked up by podcast commentators like us, and then everybody else, gleans this information, and then it comes up in, Thanksgiving Day dinners,
and that's the best, because even, now you're not only talking about money, but you're talking about politics too. And so you're just set up for total success in that answer.
The conversation this Thanksgiving for me ran the gambit. We talked about politics, of course, because the election season, and we talked about pop culture. There's a culture shift that people think is going on because of the election results, which that was interesting to get everybody's take on that. And then we also talked a lot about money. In the everybody wanted I'm known as the cryptocurrency guy. Everybody talks to me about cryptocurrency because it's kind of a pet project of mine. I am very interested in it. I've read a lot of books. I'm not an expert, but I'm knowledgeable, because I find it to be a fascinating subject. And I find the philosophical angle of money to be very engaging. So, and when you start talking about cryptocurrency and like, what is money? That is actually a very deep question. Like, what is money? Then you can get some really interesting conversations going. So we had a lot of those conversations. Now, I'm fortunate, and my family, we're all kind of the same value set. So generally everybody kind of felt the same politically, of course. But if that was not the case, then they definitely hit it well. So, but there was no like political arguments. So I kept envisioning like these families, because you hear about these families that voted different ways in this recent election, and that there was these blow-ups that occurred. I wonder how much of that actually did happen. I'm curious to get people's feedback on that after post Thanksgiving. Do a post what is it called? Post mortem. Anyway, but I did want to dive into like that philosophical conversation that I had with some of my family members. But yesterday too, it wasn't. That was just how my experience was. Yesterday, I was meeting with one of our advisors in our office, and she was telling me about a client experience. They had Thanksgiving, and the mom had a bacterial infection that degraded into some form of temporary dementia. And the sister, they live all the way in Alabama, and then she lives next to her sister. The son lives up here in the tri-state area. So naturally, the mother, a month before she was diagnosed as incompetent by a doctor, she signed a power of attorney, a durable power of attorney. And it was supposed to be a dual agent power of attorney where, the son and the sister both had power of attorney. Well, the sister manipulated it to where the son is the contingent. She's the primary. So and then this whole thing got uncovered during Thanksgiving Day break, and it got really awkward. And it got me thinking, it's like, man, so while the money topic in my Thanksgiving holiday was more of like educational, entertaining, like in that household, it was really like
contentious.
It was contentious. It felt really like people were stabbing each other in the back, and it got me thinking of an interesting topic for today's discussion, which is when the topic of money comes up in a household, like what are the proper ways to address it? And, what are some common do's and don'ts? And also when things like that arise, what should you do? What's the proper way to address them? How do you prevent them? So, we can touch on that a little bit, but I'll leave the mic to you here. Cause I'm interested to know, like, how did your Thanksgiving go compared to how mine went?
Well, it's interesting. So in my life, we just moved into a new house, and we hosted Thanksgiving dinner. We don't have furniture yet, so we had it on fold out chairs or fold out tables, folding chairs. I made the turkey. Most of the conversation, just like you, I mean, nobody. Although in my situation, I'll say there's political diversity. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody there weren't any blowups. Everybody seemed to play nice. But it is not uncommon. I mean, I think when I'm just thinking about Thanksgiving dinner, I was asked about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. My stepdad.
That seems to be the hot topic. Like everybody wants to talk about
Bitcoin. I mean, as we sit here and record, Bitcoin has been had a nice rally. It's been up a lot, and it's almost at 100,000 a Bitcoin. We'll see, if and when it reaches that. But one of the conversations that I thought you mentioned earlier that I find interesting is like, what is money? Like one of the most common objections at the dinner table to, the value of Bitcoin was like, I can't touch it. Mm-hmm. And I just can't help but think like, okay, so if you have $1 in your pocket and you just because you can touch that, does that make it valuable? Right? Like your dollar is just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And we've told stories in this. I mean, I think there's a episode that we did a while back that talked about wampum, back when the settlers settled North America, and how basically wampum on their own, only hold value based on, essentially the scarcity of them. And I think the story better than I do, but it causes this question of like, what is a store of value?
Yeah. So I'll give you my interpretation of what money is. And I don't think there is a fixed interpretation, because I think that humanity is dynamic, and there could be a future where there is no scarcity, and therefore there's no need for money. That's kind of like the Star Trek vision, if you will. Like in a world where you can have anything you want is at your fingertips. There's it's costless because energy is essentially free in this fictional world. It's costless to have food. It's costless to have your lights turned on. It's costless to have anything manufactured. So you can literally have anything you want, and there's no money. And then you're an interplanetary species, so you could go and have your own planet if you want in an infinite universe. So anyway, so there's in that world, in that fictional world, there really is no use for money. So, but I think money is really a way for us to divvy out scarcity. It's a way for us to assign ownership of scarce resources to individuals who are deserving of them. Well, quote unquote deserving. You could the most to allocate resources to individuals who have the highest likelihood of being productive with those resources. But it's an inefficient mechanism, and all money is imperfect and has different strengths and weaknesses. The money system we have right now is called fiat. Fiat essentially is, you can
print more of it.
Well, you can print more of it, but it's money by government edict. So the governments are basically saying this is worth money because we say so, and we're going to enforce. Really, what it boils down to is they enforce that their citizens pay taxes in that form of currency, and they also issue a lot of regulations that don't necessarily mandate, although they do in a lot of cases they do mandate, but they strongly encourage through the law the use of this currency, which is currently in the United States the dollar, in Europe it's the euro, in China it's the yuan, so forth and so on. So, but there's nothing that really anchors these currencies into something scarce. So
because you can print more of them.
Yeah, and then you get what's called the Cantillon effect, and the Cantillon effect is it was an effect recognized by an economist with the last name Cantillon. I don't know his first name, but the effect is that those who get the freshly printed money quickest are the ones that benefit the most because they get to expend that money before inflation takes effect. So essentially, they get today's prices with tomorrow's inflated dollars. So they benefit from the Cantillon effect. So this basically means that the closer you are to the government printing machine, the better off you are. So that's financial institutions, it's healthcare institutions. So you just got to look at government spending. Who are the recipients of government spending? And those are mostly large institutions like defense contractors, large institutions that hold treasuries because they're getting the interest that comes in. But really, there's nothing that anchors our currency besides the fact that there's a network. So a lot of people say, the military anchors our currency. It's like, well, I don't necessarily agree with that because there's a lot of things that don't have the benefit of a military that still are worth money. I think that's just one component. I really think the thing that anchors the dollar more than anything is the fact that the dollar anywhere in the world is recognized as as something that can be exchanged for a good or service. So it's essentially the network effect. The dollar has the largest network of anything in the world. It's more ubiquitous than even Facebook or TikTok. Like the dollar has more users than any other technology in the world, bar none. And I think to say that doesn't have a value is nuts. I think that is the value of the dollar. If you want to test my theory, go anywhere in the world. I don't care where you go. Well, besides like Antarctica, it has to be a populated area. So I'm going to take you to, Bangladesh, for example. Take a crisp $100 bill, go into a busy street and drop it and just walk away. See how quickly that $100 bill lasts before someone else picks it up. It is not going to get trampled. It's not going to get, pushing them. You do this with just any piece of paper. You could take a, Mexican peso and do that and drop it at a store. Someone might pick it up at curiosity. They won't recognize it. I'll just put it back down. $100 bill. It is, everybody recognizes it.
Did you know that 60%, 59% of the world's currency, if you took all the money that's in production in the world, it's out there, 59% of it is dollars.
Yeah.
People talk about like the fall of the dollar. But I think that when you really look at this, I think people point a lot of times to China as like the potential, currency that overthrows the dollar. How much of the global currency do you think is Chinese?
I would say it's probably 5%. 2%. Yeah.
Right. So the dollar is 60. The next closest is the euro at 20, and then the yen at 6. So when you look at, global currency, all the money that's out there, you're talking 85% is either US, Europe, or Japan. Right. So the likelihood of some, other currency overtaking the US dollar, at least some other fiat currency, seems kind of far-fetched. Now we get back to, those assets don't have scarcity, right? That's kind of the whole point you're making with these fiat currencies. Correct?
Yeah. So scarcity is a component of, really, it's not, it's not necessary. Scarcity is not necessary for something to be money, but it is necessary for money to be viable for a long period of time. Because what eventually will happen is that the folks who have the power to print, and it is a controlled mechanism. It's not like there's one person in the United States government that just can create trillions upon trillions of dollars by hitting a print button. There's a whole entire mechanism that is in place, and it starts with, Congress, and then it goes to the Treasury, and then the Fed is involved. But to create currency requires it's a lot easier to create new dollars than it is to create more gold, for example. Although, did you hear that China just found a gold? They found a gold discovery worth $86 billion in gold in China. Yeah, it's freaking nuts. I forget what it's called, but yeah, it does. Every now and again, you do get this influx of new gold. But so having something that is fixed and scarce prevents. It is like it's an antidote to human perversion of incentives. We have a situation where there are a lot of people in the United States that are voting for benefits for themselves. So if you look at the way anyone votes, and I'm not just saying welfare. I'm also saying people who have a lot of money that want low taxes. We all vote based on which policy is going to end up with the most
with their pocketbook.
Correct. And what that's created is an incentive structure amongst policymakers where you want taxes to be minimized, although we haven't been very successful at that. But we basically want no tax increases, at least no salient tax increases. We've obviously had tax creep, but we've never really seen the last person that ran on a tax increase was George Bush Sr., and he didn't win. They say, well, what about the Affordable Care Act? Well, that wasn't pitched as a tax increase. That was pitched as a
healthcare for all.
Yeah, well, it was pitched as a mandate penalty. So the Supreme Court later determined that it was a tax, and that's what made it constitutional. But the point is that politicians can't really run a successful campaign on tax increases, but nor can they run a successful campaign on spending cuts. So you've got this situation where the political incentive is to deficit spend. And what happens with deficit spending? Well, you contact the Treasury and you say, Treasury, we need, right now the deficit's over $2 trillion a year. We've got $6.7 trillion in spending and $4.2 trillion in tax receipts, something like that. And the Treasury has to go out and auction these securities. Well, these bonds get bought up by financial institutions. Right now, there's enough cash either internationally or domestically to sustain these the treasury auctions. But what happens when there's not enough cash left in the system to sustain this auction? Well, then that's when you get quantitative easing. So you basically see the Fed basically cannibalizes that they buy fixed income debt and then they trade it for cash, and then those banks then take the cash and they buy the treasuries from the treasury. So it basically creates the system where we get a larger quantity of dollars in the system. And if you want to know how does this equal in terms of total money supply growth, it equals about 7% a year. So we have seen since 1971, I believe, about a 7% increase annually in money supply. Now, this is lumpy. It's not like every year we get 7% increase. We've had a 40% increase just injected into the system as part of the COVID response. But you see how this creates a cantillon effect, and then it also perverts incentives. Where now and this is also why we've seen a lot of consolidation in banks. We've seen a lot of consolidation and big business, because in order to really succeed, you want to secure government contracts, and you also want to buddy up with the government, to have them carve out regulations that keep out competitors, from eating your market share, and it just promotes these larger entities that benefit more from the cantillon effect. So there's a lot of unintended consequences of this, and I don't think there's one entity or one individual that's orchestrating all this. I think it's just part of the machine. And the reason why it's happened is because first in 1913, we went off the gold standard. So we completely decoupled the dollar from gold, which was the thing that
was what kept you from just printing as much as you want.
Correct. And then in 1971, this is when the United States actually defaulted. People say the United States has never defaulted on its debt. Actually, it did. In 1971, China tried to basically cash in the treasuries that they had for the gold in Fort Knox. And the Nixon administration said, we changed our mind. Can't do that anymore.
It's called the Nixon shock.
Yeah. And that was the date that the United States officially defaulted on the gold-backed dollar, and the dollar ceased being backed by gold. You can no longer exchange your dollar for any gold. You couldn't do that since 1913, really, but institutionally you could do it. Like sovereign funds could cash it in. It could redeem their debt for U.S. debt for gold back all the way up to 1971. So anyway, the dollar still works as money. Everybody knows. You can't deny that. In fact,
back to your example of $100 falling in the street.
Yeah, the network effect.
If you saw a $20 bill on the sidewalk, are you going to walk over it the same way you would a piece of trash?
Yeah. So the network effect,
another piece of paper.
The network effect of the dollar is what drives, I think, most of the dollar's worth. And the question then is okay, well, how much money can be printed before that network effect is deteriorated? And I really don't know if anybody knows the limit to that. Because I think that probably how much money, how much would the government have to abuse the dollar hegemon position for the globe to say, you know what, let's go to yuan, because this is not worth it anymore. The stability is completely gone. I think that we've kind of found out in 2020 and 2021 and 22 with all this currency creation, what the globe's sensitivity to that is. And I believe it's not infinite. We saw that the dollar, you've heard this term BRICS, BRICS stands for
Brazil, Russia, India, China.
Correct. And there's a lot of talk. In fact, I think that Trump just recently announced that any countries that are entertaining the idea of taking the BRICS as an off ramp to the dollar, he's going to tariff them 100%, which that's not going to happen. How are you going to tariff China, India, Russia? Russia's really not a strong trading partner, but China and India are definitely strong trading partner. You can't tariff them 100%. So I think it's a lot of bark with no bite potential. But but what it is telling us is that the incoming administration sees this as a risk to dollar hegemon. So I think that that the off ramp is growing in terms of the potential for competitors to the dollar arising over the next decade. This is not going to be something that is a switch that's flipped. But I think the biggest thing that actually happened to promote this BRICS thing wasn't actually the printing of the dollars, because although I do think that is part of it, I think the biggest thing was that it was when Russia was cut off from the SWIFT.
The weaponization.
The weaponization of the dollar was really what freaked a lot of...
For the listeners that might not know, rewind back to when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, one of the first orders of action was essentially to cut Russia off of the global payment system, which is called SWIFT, and it operates in US dollars. And so, at least initially, essentially Russia couldn't do business around the world. Now, fast forward, they found ways to get around that, but it sparked this bigger question amongst, these other powers in the world, which is like, okay, how are we supposed to reconcile the fact that all the goods and services around the world are transacted in US, the SWIFT payment system is operated in dollars. And so when you actually look at things like gold, I mean, one of the beliefs that I have is that the price of gold is less related to inflation and more related to like these kinds of geopolitical, events, because what happens is gold, whether it's equivalent to dollars based on what you said in the gold, it's not equivalent to dollars, but whether you're in the US or you're in France or you're in China or you're in Russia, if you buy an ounce of gold, it's priced in dollars. And so by default, if you take your Chinese currency and buy an ounce of gold, you now own gold in dollars. You own dollars. And so by having access, it's interesting that China found this big gold deposit, but by having access to more gold, you actually have access to dollars that exist outside of this global payment system. And so, one of the things that I'm interested to see is like over the next, let's just call it 10 years or whatever. I mean, how do we really truly see the nervousness around the weaponization of the dollar impact other countries around the world? But I think we've gotten a little further off the point. I mean, the point is dollars are not scarce. When family asks you about Bitcoin and why it drives any value, I mean, a lot of the value that drives Bitcoin is the fact that it has scarcity, right?
Well, I think one thing I wanted to dispel immediately is this idea of intrinsic value, that things have value because just intrinsically they're valuable, meaning that, it's absent human action, these things would continue to have value. And that's just complete, bull crap. That is not how it works. Here's an example. So, water is valuable. I think you would agree with that. Now, if you're on a boat, say you're in a canoe in the middle of Lake Erie and you're trying to sell a fresh glass of water, how much money are you going to get for that?
Well,
zero. In fact, it's negative value to you because you don't want the water in your kayak and there's nobody around you that you can sell it to. All right, now let's put you in the middle of the Sahara Desert and you're in a group of 50 people that are all dying of thirst and they all have thick wallets. And you have that same glass of water. How much is that worth? Probably all the money that anybody has, and they'll bid it up all the way to the ceiling. So, there was nothing intrinsically different about that glass of water in both of those scenarios. The only thing that changed was the human experience. In one area you were surrounded by water, it was abundant, and you had no one to sell it to. And the other area is the complete opposite. What scarcity does is it's a repellent to the perversion of human incentives. That's essentially what it does. What brings value to everything, what brings value to the dollar is the same thing that brings value to Amazon stock or brings value to your house or brings value to anything. It's the fact that you can leverage common human experience to extract value out of that. And the common human experience associated with the dollar is that it is the most ubiquitously traded.
Yeah, anywhere you go.
Yeah, anywhere you go.
Nobody's asking to get paid in stock. They're not asking to get paid in Bitcoin. You know, when you go to a store, you go pay your mortgage or whatever. It's all in dollars.
It's the network, silly. It's the network that makes it so valuable. The fact that you can trade it anyway. And I think that you could abuse that network quite a bit in terms of like deficit spending before that network dissolves. Now, I'm not saying that network power is invincible. It is not invincible. We found that out during COVID. And we also found out during the sanction, the weaponization of the dollar. Like there are limits to what the globe can tolerate. And it actually did shrink that network. I forget what the dollar, it was like at 70%. Now it's at 60%. So it was higher than the stat that you just gave us. But let's look at Bitcoin. Like why does Bitcoin have value? The folks that are wrong, like Charlie Munger was wrong about this, and so is Warren Buffett. Like these guys are visionaries, but they're wrong about this, I think. And now you might think like, well, who are you, Ben? You're not worth billions of dollars. Like, yeah, okay, so discount my opinion, please. But I do think that they're wrong about this, and the evidence is abundant. Like Bitcoin is worth $95,000 right now. Like if I were wrong about it, then it should be worth a lot less than that.
Well, and let me get us back to, kind of the core conversation, which is like how to talk to your family about money. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you go to a family event and your cousin is talking about, what cryptocurrency, they just bought, maybe they bought Ripple and they've taken $1,000 and made it into $6,000 and they're feeling pretty good.
Yeah. And they're asking you with all that.
What do I do?
What do I do with it? And then you've got all this information.
You are set up for failure from the beginning. There's no good answer to that question as a money guy.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can clearly hold it, trim it, sell it, buy more. I mean, there's a couple of things that you can do, but at the end of the day, proper financial planning isn't about speculation. Like you said, it's about risk management, right? And so, there's a lot of things that I need to know about your situation before I can tell you what you should do with your Ripple or whatever it is that's just made, 500%. There's also a lot of different situations. Maybe you're somebody that really matters if it may you hit a home run on something like that. But, you have a lot of people that, like, one of the traps that I see with wealthy clients is some of my clients are already wealthy. They don't need to make 20x on their money, to make their finances work. So you have to start thinking about what are the risks that are worth taking, and I certainly wouldn't advocate that they speculate in smaller cryptocurrencies. So the point I'm making with that is that finance is personal. I liked your example about the desert and the glass of water. To me, what that reflected was like, when we do financial planning with clients, some clients, like I'll use a totally discretionary item. You talk about somebody retiring and whether they want a nice car, or not. To some people, that nice car would be incredibly valuable. To others, it's totally useless or worthless. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge not just like, it's really important to acknowledge that what's valuable to you and what's valuable to the other person that you're talking to at the dinner table may be different. And that's okay. Right. And the approach that you take and the tact that you set to accomplish those things are also going to be different. So if they're speculating in cryptocurrencies and they've made 500%, maybe that's good. Maybe that's not so good. You don't know the extent of their financial situation. And by the way, when somebody asks you on the spot at a holiday dinner, what do you think about something? Like, that's not like, I'll speak from personal experience where like I've tried to answer that. Like, it's just not the time to have that conversation.
No, I know.
It's tempting, but it is not the time.
Well,
so like, how do you like, and maybe this, I'll turn this a little bit, like when it comes to your family and the people that are close to you, like what is the right way to set up that conversation to talk about money? Like if in theory, my cousin at Thanksgiving dinner says, gosh, should I hold on to this cryptocurrency or not? What should I do?
Well, one thing I definitely would advise people to not do is never talk numbers. I think people I think instinctively know this, but there's always that cousin that, hit it big on some trade that they did and they're worth X amount of dollars now. And they're just telling everybody. And I will tell you right now that is just uncouth. Don't do that. Don't disclose dollar amounts in a public setting. Now, if you're in an intimate setting with, a close relative, maybe it's your dad or your mom, or your kids, and you want them to know, like, hey, this is a part of what I'm doing. It's part of my estate plan. Then yeah, that makes sense in an intimate setting, but never at a Thanksgiving dinner table with 5 different lineages there. Should you be saying, oh, I made $1 million on this trade? I think that's just don't do that, because you're just going to trigger resentment and also judgment. So of course, I think most people instinctively know not to do that, but I would just caution anybody, like, don't be broad.
Should we forget about Thanksgiving dinner in front of everybody for a minute?
Or just any setting.
Should we be spending more time talking to the people that are close to us about money?
It depends. It depends, because not every family is the same. I'll give you an example. Say my mom wanted to divvy up assets a certain way. And I don't know if she does. She's never divulged this to me. I actually told my mom, I gave my mom the estate planner that I work with, and I said, go see this person, get your estate documents done, communicate what you want to communicate. So far she hasn't, these documents are under lock and key. I have not been communicated. I don't know what she wants to divvy up, but let's say I did, and she communicated this, and she said, okay, I'm setting up a trust. Ben, you're going to get X. Kim, you're going to get X or Y, and Seth, that's my brother, you're going to get Z. There are going to be personalities in my family that inspect that and say, oh, that's not fair, or this is not fair. And it's going to cause all sorts of drama. So I think you have to be somewhat cautious.
But isn't that going to get figured out anyway? I mean, like, at what point is that putting your head in the sand, right? Like, is it a good thing that you and your brother and sister don't really know what that might look like? And then you're going to, because inevitably you are going to find out. Mm-hmm. It's an inevitability. So
maybe, my mom could, this is just one example, but the state might be exhausted by the time you get around to it.
Sure. Okay. That's fine.
So that, I just think that you got to take your family dynamics into consideration. I don't think I can carte blanche to say, hey, yeah, disclose your financial situation to your kids, because there's some situation where the kids don't have what's mom and dad's interest at heart. I literally know of a situation where a son sued his own mother for access to a trust fund that her second marriage, she remarried into another, her husband had a lot of wealth and he passed away, and he set up these trust accounts for the benefit of his wife's, the son's mom's grandkids. The son was just so bitter that he wasn't getting any of that money. It was his kids that were getting that money. He sued his own mom in court and actually won to be the trustee of those accounts, because the court viewed the father as being the more appropriate trustee of these accounts. And you can imagine how those accounts were spent. So,
but does that justify putting your head in the sand? Like, what I guess I'm challenging is not that you should divulge everything and have ultimate clarity, but what I guess I'm suggesting is that you should be doing something to prepare to communicate the estate plan that you have, right? I don't care if that's telling everybody all the numbers, if that's managing expectations on one-on-one conversations with people, if that's writing a note that's going to that's going to come with the estate documents after you pass away, explaining your rationale for things. But I think it's important that, once you can't speak for yourself, like the people that you've left, one, are prepared for whatever inheritance or whatever financial situation they might be in at that point. And that's a whole nother conversation around like, what do you do with your kids and your family to help make sure that they are prepared for those kinds of things? But not only are they prepared, but they have, some sense of the why. Because I think if you leave, like, let's just take your example. Let's say your mom, for whatever reason, decided to give more money to one child versus the other two, and then never left you anything to like explain that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you guys are going to live the rest of your lives like with some level of question around it. And so I just think, while I'm in agreement with you that you have to be considerate of your family situation and you don't just want to tell everybody for the sake of telling everybody, it's really important that you spend time thinking about how you're going to treat each child or each inheritor in your estate, that you communicate with these people. And back to the family conversations, I think that as it relates to money, do you want to be talking numbers all the time? Like, no, but one of the hardest things I think for clients, being that they're not financial planners, is over the course of a client's life, they might see a handful of financial situations. I mean, you've got a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister, close friend. There are a few people that might open up to you about like, here's what my finances actually look like. But the likelihood that you have more than enough people that you can count on two hands is like pretty low. So you get to see a couple of finance, and maybe they worked, maybe they didn't. As a financial planner, like you and I have both seen thousands of clients and financial situations, and what makes somebody financially successful, what makes somebody financially not as successful, right? And there is value in having some understanding of those things. And so how are we supposed to, I guess my question in all of this is like, how as a parent or as a family member, whoever's important to you, how do you have the right kinds of conversations to help make sure that person is prepared, that person has the knowledge and the tools to take care of themselves financially, and then communicate with them what your intentions are with whatever money you might be giving them.
Now we're kind of getting shoehorned into the whole estate planning conversation, and I'm thinking of this topic more broadly, because it could go the other way. What if you're a child and you're having financial discussions, about your own finances with your parents, and they might be somewhat judgmental about your decisions. Like, when is it a good time to discuss finances with relatives? And I say generally it's a good time. It's a very nuanced situation, because it has to be, the person you're talking to has to be someone you can trust. And sometimes your family members are not people you can trust, and also they have to be, you have to think about this in terms of overall productivity. Like what goal am I trying to achieve here? And does divulging this financial information to this individual get me closer to that goal? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes divulging this information is only going to produce conflict. So you kind of have to be, and I do think people take this too far, and then they just assume there's going to be conflict in every discussion. And then they just hold everything close to your chest, or they hold all their cards close to your chest, and then they don't ever have discussions that could benefit them financially. Example could be like, maybe you're, a single person and you're struggling financially. You can't get your traction, but you don't want to mention this to your dad, because your dad is going to, you're afraid that he's going to be super judgmental and going to say, well, you're just not trying or working hard enough. It could be that maybe the dad understands, and they would give you a place to live for a little bit where you could get, some traction. So, I'm thinking this more broadly than just estate planning.
And I think that's a good point. I didn't mean to drive down, but like,
I understand what you're getting at, but I think that the answer is that the default, in my opinion, should be guarded. Be guarded with your finances. I don't think that if, like, especially if you are, let's say your mom and dad, you're in your later stages of life, and then you've accumulated quite a bit. I think the wrong thing to do most of the time, not all the time, sometimes it's appropriate, but most of the time is to sit down with all your kids and say, here's what I have. This is where it is. Here's how it's invested. Because then I will tell you, that's going to change the way your kids feel about you. They may say, I know this for a fact because I see it in my family. They may say, oh, mom, dad, spend all the money. But meanwhile, they're making plans in their heads for 20 years from now. When you're dead, you're in the grave, and they're throwing the dirt on your grave, and they're thinking, okay, well, I can finally get that, that nice vacation house. I mean, they may do it subconsciously, but it does happen. It does change the family dynamics. And I don't think that is healthy most of the time. Now, here's where it's appropriate. Let's say you're a widower or a widow, and you have substantial means, and you're by yourself. You have no one to talk about money with, and no one's there to not second guess, but look over your shoulder, make sure that you're making wise financial decisions. My wife does that for me. Gosh, does she ever do that for me? Ben, you spent how much? Yeah, anyway, so here's an example, and this is close to home for me. So a client and a very good friend of mine lost his spouse, and she was kind of the guardian angel of this fella, and he found himself, as one does in this situation, being very lonesome. And several years later, he decided, okay, well, I'm going to go back out in the dating scene, and put his information on, one of these dating sites. I think he used a couple of them. And I tell you what, the scam artists came out of the woodwork. They had hooked him, were reeling him in, and finally he kind of got like some wisdom about him and said, this doesn't feel right. Brought it up to his daughters. Finally, like, he was so embarrassed to discuss this with his daughters, and his daughters basically just ripped the veil from his eyes. And it was a very uncomfortable experience, but it happened, and it saved this individual potentially thousands upon thousands of dollars of money and fraud. So in that example, I think it's very appropriate for this individual to sit down with his daughters and say, here's what I have and here's where it is. Help me police this. So,
when isn't this really like kind of at the end of the day, the value of an advisor, right? Like an independent third party that's not your family member that has a vested interest in your inheritance or whatever. I mean, again, we're talking about the inheritance situation in this case, but like, isn't it so much more freeing to be able to have somebody that knows about everything, can speak to you with your personal situation in mind.
Yeah.
And has all of that context in a way that you're not worried about them changing their, life or their spending decisions based on it. And be able to ping pong and backboard ideas with that person.
Yeah. It all boils down to this. All value is subjective to your experience, and your experience is unique to you. And, this could be for, intertwined with questions of, should I own Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency? Should I, talk to my family about my finances? What should I do with my career? Like, these are all very, very specific situations unique to you, and they're going to change your overall value profile. And it's like, and trying to DIY this, it's possible to do, but it's like having if you've ever had a therapist, it just helps you talking with a trusted advisor, someone that's been down this road with other people, has a much broader set of experiences to draw from, can kind of help guide you through through this emotional desert, because
it helps you take a step back and see, kind of the bigger,
see the situation with more
up.
clarity. And I'm talking about any financial situation, because finance, again, is intertwined with being and money. And it's not so simple as like, buy an index fund to forget. That is one of the most brain dead pieces of financial advice I see people give online. There is no such thing as a boilerplate financial plan. There isn't. It's
even if you're using S&P 500 index funds.
Yeah, I don't have anything against S&P 500 index funds, but I don't think that that's a successful financial plan. It's just voo and chill. I think that is brain dead. Can it work? Yeah. If you are in that specific situation where that is all you need, but I've yet to encounter that outside of maybe like a 19-year-old that lives at home and has nothing else to do with their money.
Well, the reality is your money and its impact on your life and the value that you get from it is more than just the total or the return that you get over time and the expenses that you don't pay. There's a lot that advisors should be doing to help you think through how to be smart with your taxes, how to manage your behaviors, how to have these kinds of conversations in your family situation. A lot of these things have I'll say a tangible, real value that exists outside of, what fund did you buy?
Yeah. That was just one silly example. I mean, you've got, you name it. I mean, we've already talked about it in the Thanksgiving Day barrage of questions we got. Most of it was around Bitcoin and other like hot stocks. That's all. I get that all the time. I get it from my clients, and we all bring it back down to your set of values and what you're trying to accomplish and what is the experience that you want. Because at the end of the day, all value is subject to human experience, and your experience should be paramount among those experiences. So when you back to the original, we'll bring it full circle and we'll close it. Back to this question: should you hire someone to work on your bathroom, or save that money and work on it yourself and apply it elsewhere? Well, what are you going to do with that experience? What's that experience worth to you? So I think to answer that question for myself, I think the answer for you is I would hire someone. And the answer for me is I would do it myself and we both would be right. There's no right answer for that. That can be applied to everyone here. So in my situation, I think of this, I think we're thinking about $7,000 to finish this bathroom. And I thought to myself, well, actually that was the door. We're talking about replacing our front door, and it was going to cost $7,000. And you had the same experience recently, and you thought, I'm just going to pay someone to do it. And I thought my response to that was, no, I can do that myself because I can knock it out in a weekend and be done with it. And I'm going to pocket the $6,000. So my experience in this is I've been down that road. I've done it. I know what it takes to replace a door. It's not that difficult to do. I'm willing to sacrifice a weekend. And so my experience is the trade-off wasn't worth it. But in your experience, you're thinking about all the stress that was going to cause.
I'm thinking, you mentioned what do I do when the door's out and I run into a problem I don't know how to solve, and then I don't have a front door? So what do I put a tarp on the front of the house for a week? I mean, I can just see exactly how this would happen for me. Mm-hmm. I'd either spend, 100 hours plus trying to teach myself all the stuff that I'm going to need to know to deal with all the problems, because I have to learn it before doing the door. Because once the door is ripped out, it's out. You got to get something back in. So of course, with my luck, I would rip the door out. I'd find that there's a bigger problem that I know how to handle. I'd put a tarp, or I don't even know what I would do at that point. And then I would end up calling somebody to come fix it anyway. And I'd probably end up having a tarp over my front door for 2 weeks. I mean, that to me, if you asked me, hey, Brent, would you spend a little bit more money to make sure that doesn't happen and you can spend your time focused on your business and your family and not stressed out about the lack of front door? Probably worthwhile. Yeah.
And my experience would be this. So this is the way I interpret it. And this is a perfect example of how, value experiences vary wildly between individuals. And you could take this same concept and apply it to virtually every financial topic. Here's what I would do. And I actually did this. I replaced a window in my front house, and I was like, oh, I can do that. I bought the window, and I started taking the window off. And then I found that all the siding, all the when they originally built our house, they didn't put Tyvek, which is this vapor barrier. on it. So all the wood, the plywood around this window was rotted all the way down to the base of the base of the house, the concrete
foundation.
Yeah, foundation. So and then like the rot even got into some of the 2x4s. So I went from replacing a window to I had all the siding ripped off. I had plywood ripped off. I had 2x4s out of the frame of my house. And
so this sounds like a disaster.
You would think, but here's what I thought. That I didn't go into this experience like thinking, woe is me. I actually was excited. I was like, oh, I get to do all this stuff. I get to learn how to do it. And then I actually had a tarp in my house for a month while I was doing all this work. My wife she's a saint for putting up with all this stuff. But you can see how like I think differently about the experience than you do. You think of it in terms of like, wow, that would be so stressful to do that. And I viewed it as kind of like a learning opportunity. I won't. Here's the thing is like with that, what am I going to do with that knowledge? I'm not going to start a business. I essentially just found pride in doing it myself.
You pocketed a little bit of money. And so that's, again, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, my belief is that, being good with how to preserve and maintain and grow money, if you can do those things well, over time, that is worth, it's so easy to look at a project like a front door and say, oh my gosh, I can save $6,000. That's real money in my pocket today. But, there is a cost to that too. And one of the reasons that I believe in what we do, and at a young age, I realized this, I thought my grandpa always used to say, there's two types of work. There's man at work and money at work. And money has a lot less limitations on its hours. And, I think that there's a lot to be said for being smart with, if you're going to spend all the time and the energy and the hours to save the $6,000 on the front door, and you're not going to take the time and the energy to actually make sure your financial plan is in place and you've got a pathway to financial, like that seems really backwards to me. One of those things saves you $6,000. The other one is likely worth millions of dollars over time, making sure that you've got a solidly intact financial plan. And so in my opinion, so long as you're saving your $6,000 and you're well-versed and you have a good financial plan, then great. But if you are ignoring your finances and not really taking ownership of your, investing prowess and the way that you handle your wealth, but you're really obsessing on saving $5,000 on a project at home, maybe there's some reflecting that you ought to do.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to save a nickel to spend a dollar. So you have your priorities in order, and I think that's back, to the value of having an objective financial planner, someone who can kind of help you see the forest through the trees. Well, Brian, I think that should wrap up the conversation. We went a little long today, but I think that we had like essentially two deep topics to cover, family and money, and also just the philosophy of money, like what is money. So probably went a little deeper than we should have today, but it was a good conversation nonetheless.
Yeah, really enjoyed this, and I'm sure we'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about other stuff. So,
yeah, thanks for listening. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Any company names noted herein are for educational purposes only and not an indication of trading intent or a solicitation of their products or services. Advisors associated with National Wealth Management Group may be either 1. Registered representatives with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC, and investment advisor representatives of National Wealth Management Group. Or 2, solely investment advisor representatives of National Wealth Management Group and not affiliated with LPL Financial. Investment advice offered through National Wealth Management Group, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial.